They called him the legend, a general who'd never lost a battle. But when enemy tanks had them pinned behind a ridge in hostile territory, even he knew they were finished. Only a legend could hit that far, he shouted in frustration, staring at the command tank controlling the assault from over a mile away. No one moved. No one except her, the quiet specialist whose advice he'd ignored for months. Without a word, she climbed the exposed ridge, took aim with her modified launcher, and fired once. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy military stories of unsung heroes, consider subscribing for more tales of extraordinary courage in the face of impossible odds. Lieutenant General Caldwell scanned the harsh mountainous terrain through his binoculars, his weathered face revealing nothing of the tension coursing through his body. 27 years of combat experience had taught him to mask his concerns in front of the troops. Behind him, his elite tactical response team prepared their equipment. Voices low as dawn broke over the contested territory. "Rhodes Harrove with me," he called, summoning his most trusted officers to review the mission parameters one final time. Captain Rhodes spread the tactical map across a flat boulder. "Sir, our intelligence confirms the hostages are being held here." He indicated a compound nestled in the valley below. "The warlord's forces have 3 checkpoints we'll need to bypass." Lieutenant Hargrove nodded confidently. "My team can handle the perimeter security, sir." Among the soldiers checking equipment nearby, Specialist Aloe and Cass quietly observed the briefing while inspecting her modified launcher. At 34, her features carried the focused intensity of someone who calculated everything: distances, angles, probabilities. She approached the officers with a small notebook in hand. "Sir, I've been analyzing the terrain's impact on our approach vectors. These ridge formations will create unpredictable wind patterns that could affect our targeting capabilities," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "Stick to your equipment check, Specialist," Caldwell interrupted without looking up from the map. "We've got the tactical assessment covered." Ilawan's expression remained neutral as she nodded and stepped back. She returned to her position, pulling out a small calculator and making additional notes based on her observations of the terrain. When no one was watching, she made minute adjustments to her launcher sighting mechanism. Captain Rhodes glanced briefly at Aloan before returning his attention to the general. "Sir, what about air support if things go sideways?" "Unavailable in this region," Caldwell replied. "We're on our own for this one. Clean extraction, minimum engagement. Get in. Secure the hostages. Get out. The warlord's forces are well armed, but poorly trained. We have the advantage of superior tactics and discipline." The officers nodded, confirming their understanding of the mission objectives. As they dispersed to brief their respective teams, Elone continued her solitary work, measuring angles with a small protractor and noting wind speeds in her weathered notebook. Corporal Jenkins, a fresh-faced soldier barely a year into his deployment, approached Elone with hesitation. "Ma'am, is there something wrong with the standard equipment?" Elon glanced up, surprised that someone had taken interest in her work. "Not wrong, just imprecise." She showed him her notebook filled with equations and diagrams. The standard targeting systems use generalized calculations that don't account for micro-terrain features or atmospheric anomalies. Jenkins peered at the notes, clearly lost among the complex mathematics. "And that matters. It can mean the difference between hitting your target and missing by 15 m, replied. "In these mountains with these winds, the standard calculations are off by nearly 20%. "How do you know that?" A faint smile touched Eloine's lips before quickly disappearing. "Experience." As the day progressed, the unit moved through the rocky terrain toward their objective. Elone kept to herself, always watching, always calculating. When they crossed a high ridge with a clear view of the valley below, she paused longer than the others, taking detailed notes on wind patterns and distances. Lieutenant Hargrove noticed her lingering. "Cass, keep up. We're not sightseeing." "Yes, sir," she replied, quickly rejoining the formation, but not before taking one last measurement with a small laser rangefinder that she tucked back into her pocket. That evening, As the unit bivouacked in a sheltered ravine, Ilone sat apart from the others. Under the dim glow of a tactical light, she meticulously maintained her weapon, checking and rechecking calculations in her notebook. Young Corporal Jenkins approached again, curiosity overcoming his shyness. "What are you working on, Specialist?" Elon glanced up briefly. "Wind compensation formulas. I'm accounting for the temperature gradient in the valley and barometric pressure changes at various elevations." Her fingers traced invisible trajectories in the air. The crosswinds between these mountain passes create a Venturi effect that accelerates airflow approximately 22% above standard models, which means conventional targeting systems will fail to account for lateral drift over distances greater than 800 m. She continued explaining complex ballistics mathematics until Jenkins' eyes glazed over. He nodded politely before retreating to join his friends by the small camp stove. "What's her deal?" one of the soldiers asked as Jenkins returned to the group. Jenkins shrugged. "She's really into math, I guess. Something about wind and angles. Heard she requested transfer to this unit specifically." Another soldier added. "General didn't want her, but command insisted we needed a demolition specialist. She ever see combat? Who knows? She never talks about herself." Across the camp, Ilone could hear their conversation, but gave no indication she was listening. Instead, she removed a small cloth bundle from the bottom of her pack. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing several medals and comminations. Her fingers traced over an embossed emblem, an Olympic symbol alongside a military crest, before she quickly rewrapped them and buried them back in her pack. No one had asked about her background since she joined the unit 6 months ago, and Lieutenant General Caldwell had made it clear that he had no interest in the specialized knowledge she tried repeatedly to share. Near the command area, Caldwell reviewed the next day's approach with his officers. "We'll move out before dawn. Approach from the eastern ridge. The hostages are held here." He pointed to a building on the tactical display. "Rods, your team will secure the perimeter. Hardrove, you'll handle the extraction." "What about the specialist, sir?" Rhodes asked. "Where do you want Cass positioned?" Caldwell barely glanced in Alone's direction. "Keep her with the support element. I don't want her fancy theories complicating the operation. She seems to know her stuff, sir." Rhodes ventured carefully. "She's not field-tested with this unit," Caldwell replied firmly. "I don't care what credentials she came with. In my experience, academics don't belong in tactical operations." Rhodes nodded, knowing better than to argue with the general. "Yes, sir." After the briefing concluded, Captain Rhodes found himself watching Ilone as she worked alone by the light of her small tactical lamp. Something about her methodical precision intrigued him. Unlike most soldiers who maintain their weapons out of duty, she worked with the focused intensity of someone pursuing perfection. He approached, standing quietly until she acknowledged his presence. "Captain," she said without looking up. "You've made some modifications to your launcher," he observed. "Anything I should know about?" Elon finally looked up. "I've adjusted the sighting system to account for the specific environmental conditions in this region. It won't affect the operation." Rhodes studied her for a moment. "The general doesn't like surprises, specialist." "I'm aware, sir. You've tried to brief him on your adjustments before." 17 times in 6 months, she replied, her voice neutral, revealing neither frustration nor anger. Rhodes raised an eyebrow. "That's precise." "I am precise, Captain. It's why I'm good at what I do." "And what exactly is that?" "Your file is surprisingly vague for someone assigned to this unit." Ilone carefully placed her weapon down and met his gaze directly. "Long-range ballistic problem solving in complex environments." "Sir, I calculate what others assume is impossible." Before Rhodes could respond, the radio crackled with a message from their forward scout, reporting all clear at the next checkpoint. He nodded to Elone and returned to his duties, making a mental note to look more closely at her personnel file when they returned to base. As darkness fell completely over the camp, Elone finished her preparations and secured her equipment. Tomorrow would test them all. She closed her notebook and stared into the darkness beyond their camp, mentally calculating trajectories across the valley below. Something about the mission parameters troubled her, but she had learned months ago that Caldwell was not interested in her concerns. She would be ready regardless. She always was. The mission collapsed 90 minutes after dawn. Contact front. Heavy weapons. The forward scout's voice cracked through the radio as the first explosion rocked the valley. Caldwell cursed, grabbing his binoculars. "What is that?" The intel said, "Light vehicles only." Instead of the expected pickup trucks with mounted guns, 3 armor tanks emerged from concealed positions. One at close range, another moving to flank them, and a third larger and more sophisticated, directing operations from a ridge almost a mile away. "Fall back to defensive position." "Bravo," Caldwell ordered as enemy fire intensified. "Rhodes, get those wounded moving." The unit scrambled backward toward a rocky outcropping, helping 2 injured soldiers. Bullets kicked up dust around them as they dove for cover behind a ridge. Captain Readiness checked his GPS tracker. "Sir, our extraction team is pinned down by another enemy unit. They're at least 40 minutes out." Caldwell's jaw tightened as he assessed their deteriorating position. "Options, people. I need options." The officers huddled together, debating increasingly desperate strategies. While Ilan observed the enemy positions, she pulled out her notebook, making rapid calculations as she studied the command tank through her specialized scope. "Lieutenant Hargrove, if we split into 2 teams, we might be able to circle around to the north." And Caldwell stopped mid-sentence as Alone approached with her notebook extended. "Sir, I've calculated a firing solution for the command tank. If we can disable it, the other tanks will lose coordinated tactical control." Caldwell barely glanced at her notes. "Get back in position, specialist. This isn't a time for theories." Elon retreated without argument, returning to her observations. The nearest tank had broken through their forward position, forcing the remaining soldiers to fall back further, carrying the wounded to safer ground. Corporal Jenkins crawled to Eloyne's position, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "They've got us pinned down good. Haven't didn't take her eyes off the distant command tank." "For now, you look like you've got something in mind," Jenkins said, noticing her intense focus. "The command tank is controlling the other 2 remotely," she explained quietly. "Look at their movement patterns. Too precise, too coordinated for independent operators. They're using an automated tactical system." "How can you tell?" "The signal antennas on the command vehicle, and the way the tanks maintain perfect triangulation despite terrain obstacles." Jenkins peered through his binoculars. "That's the big one-way back there. It's got to be over a mile away. 1,627 meters, accounting for elevation," Alone corrected. "That's well beyond our effective range. According to standard military ballistics tables, yes." Jenkins looked at her with sudden understanding, "but not according to your calculations." Before Elon could respond, a shell exploded nearby, showering them with debris. The radio crackled with desperate updates from their scattered forces. Extraction was now impossible until the tanks were neutralized. The unit was effectively trapped. Captain Readiness joined Caldwell behind a large boulder. "Sir, we've got 2 more wounded. We're running low on ammunition, and the enemy keeps advancing." "What about air support?" "Still unavailable in this sector. Too much anti-aircraft risk." Caldwell paced behind the ridge, his composure finally cracking. "That command tank is controlling everything electronically," he shouted in frustration, pointing to the distant vehicle. "If we could just disable it, we'd have a fighting chance. But it's impossible. Only a legend could hit that far with our equipment." In the momentary silence that followed, Alone quietly shouldered her modified launcher and checked her calculations one final time. Without a word to anyone, she began climbing up the exposed face of the ridge. Corporal Jenkins noticed first. "Sir, Cask is climbing the ridge." Caldwell turned, his face registering shock as he spotted Alone reaching the top of the outcropping, completely exposed to enemy fire. "What is she doing?" "That's suicide." Every soldier watched as Alone calmly knelt on the ridge, setting up her launcher with precise, practiced movements that spoke of thousands of hours of training. enemy fire intensified, kicking up rocks and dust around her position, but she remained focused, making final adjustments to her weapon. "Someone order her back," Caldwell demanded, but his voice lacked conviction as he watched her work with unnerving precision. Captain Rodas stood transfixed. "Sir, I think she knows what she's doing." Caldwell's radio crackled again. "Sir, we've lost contact with Team Charlie. The nearest tank is approaching your position from the east." The situation was deteriorating by the second. Caldwell looked back at Eloyne, who had now fully set up her position atop the ridge. Jenkins Rhodes called. What was she saying about the command tank? Something about it controlling the others remotely. Jenkins replied, his eyes still on Eloyne. She said she had calculations for a shot. At that distance, Hargrove scoffed. "Impossible. Standard effective range is 800 meters max." Atop the ridge, the Leoan blocked out everything. The explosions, the shouting, the approaching tanks. Her world narrowed to her scope, her calculations, and her target. She made minute adjustments to her modified launcher, accounting for elevation, wind speed, temperature, and a dozen other variables that most soldiers never considered. As she prepared to fire, brief images flashed through her mind. Years of Olympic biathlon training, calculating wind effects while skiing between shooting stations, late nights in the MIT ballistics lab, proving theories her professors insisted were impossible. 3 tours and classified operations where her calculations had saved countless lives. None of it acknowledged in her current assignment. She focused her scope on the command tank's most vulnerable point, the communications array. The distance was extreme, the margin for error non-existent, but the physics were sound. Her calculations were correct. She knew it with absolute certainty. Eloyne drew a deep breath, held it for precisely 2 seconds, and squeezed the trigger. The projectile launched with a distinctive sound that made every soldier below look up. Its trajectory arced high above the valley, seeming to hang in the air for an impossibly long moment before beginning its descent toward the distant target. Time slowed as every eye tracked the projectile's path. Even the enemy fire seemed to pause momentarily. Captain Rodas unconsciously held his breath. Corporal Jenkins whispered a prayer. Lieutenant General Caldwell stood frozen, binoculars fixed on the command tank. The projectile struck with devastating precision. The command tank's communications array exploded first, followed by secondary explosions that engulfed the entire vehicle. Flames and black smoke billowed upward as ammunition cooked off inside the armored hull. For a moment, absolute silence fell over the battlefield. Then a cheer erupted from the soldiers behind the ridge. Eloyne calmly collected her equipment and slid back down to their position, her face revealing nothing of the extraordinary feat she had just accomplished. Caldwell stared at her, momentarily speechless. When he finally found his voice, all he could manage was a single word. "How?" Before Eloyne could answer, the tactical situation demanded their attention. The 2 remaining tanks, suddenly operating without central coordination, began moving erratically. One stopped completely, its turret rotating in confusion. The other continued forward, but at a significantly reduced pace. "They're running on backup systems," Eloyne explained, her voice calm and professional. "The automation is disabled. They'll be operating manually now, with limited visibility and no tactical coordination." Rhodes saw the opportunity immediately. "Sir, we can outmaneuver them now." Caldwell nodded, his tactical mind quickly adapting to the new situation. "Rhodes, take your team around the eastern flank. Hargrove, set up an ambush position here. We'll force them into a crossfire." As the officers moved to execute the new plan, Caldwell turned back to Eloyne. "Specialist Cask, I want you on overwatch. If you can make that shot, I want your eyes on everything." "Yes, sir," she replied simply, already moving to a position with the best vantage point. Within 20 minutes, the unit had successfully disabled 1 tank and forced the other into retreat. The extraction team, no longer pinned down by coordinated enemy fire, was able to reach their position. As they prepared to evacuate, Captain Rodas approached ELO, who was helping load the wounded onto the transport vehicles. That shot, he began, searching for the right words. I've never seen anything like it. Elon checked a bandage on one of the injured soldiers before responding. It was just mathematics, Captain. The right calculations at the right moment. It was more than that, Rhodes insisted. Why hasn't anyone in the unit heard about your background, your expertise? I've tried to share it, she said simply. No one asked the right questions. Before Rhodes could respond, Caldwell approached them. The general's demeanor had changed completely. The dismissive attitude was gone, replaced by something approaching respect. Specialist Kask, he said formally. When we return to base, I'd like a full briefing on your ballistic system. Of course, sir, she replied. The same briefing I've been requesting for 6 months. Caldwell had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, that one. Back at the forward operating base, the unit's return created an unusual stir. Word of the impossible shot had traveled faster than their transport vehicles. Medical staff rushed to attend to the wounded, while officers gathered to debrief the mission that had gone so wrong, then so unexpectedly right. Lieutenant General Caldwell sat in the command center reviewing the official after-action reports. The failed intelligence about enemy armor would require a thorough investigation. Someone had missed critical information, and it had nearly cost them the entire unit. Captain Rodas entered with a file folder, placing it on the desk in front of Caldwell. You asked for Specialist Kask's complete file. Sir Caldwell opened it, his expression changing as he read through pages that had somehow never made it to his attention before. This can't be right, he muttered. It's all verified, sir, RHS confirmed. I checked with Central Command personally. The general read aloud as if hearing the words might make them more believable. Specialist Aloan Kaski, former Olympic Biathlon gold medalist, Ph.D. in advanced ballistics from MIT, principal developer of the XR-7 guidance system. 3 citations for valor and classified operations in Eastern Europe. He looked up at Rhodes. The XR-7 is the guidance system we use in our next-generation missiles. She designed it? Yes, sir. Apparently, she requested this assignment specifically. She wanted field testing for some new ballistics compensation algorithm she developed. Caldwell closed the file, a complexity of emotions crossing his weathered face. Why wasn't I informed of her full qualifications when she joined the unit? Rhodes shifted uncomfortably. The file says you were, sir. There's a briefing acknowledgement with your signature from 6 months ago. The general leaned back in his chair, remembering the stack of transfer paperwork he'd hastily signed when Specialist Kask and 3 other new unit members had arrived. He'd been focused on an upcoming operation and had treated it as routine administrative work. Where is she now? Caldwell asked. Medical, sir. Getting her arm looked at. Apparently, she took some shrapnel on the ridge, but didn't report it until after we were back. Caldwell stood. I'll speak with her there. In the medical bay, L. Owen sat patiently as a doctor removed small fragments of metal from a wound on her upper arm. Her face remained composed, showing no sign of discomfort as the doctor worked. You should have reported this immediately, the doctor admonished. Some of these fragments are quite deep. The mission took priority, Elon replied simply. The doctor glanced up as Caldwell entered. General? She acknowledged with a nod. Doctor, may I have a moment with Specialist Kask? As soon as I finished removing these fragments and dressing the wound. 5 minutes. Caldwell waited silently, watching as the doctor completed her work, bandaged Iloan's arm, and gave instructions for care and follow-up before leaving them alone. How's the arm? He asked. Functional, sir. Caldwell pulled up a chair and sat facing her. I've just reviewed your complete file. I see. Why didn't you tell me who you were? He asked quietly. Elenin met his gaze directly. I did, sir. Every day for 6 months. The words hit with the precision of her earlier shot. Caldwell felt their impact and knew they were deserved. I should have listened, he admitted. Yes, sir. You should have. No excuses came to mind that wouldn't sound hollow. He had dismissed her not because of any failing on her part, but because of his own preconceptions. Because she was quiet. Because she was female. Because she approached problems with calculations instead of bravado. "Your shot saved the entire unit today," he said finally. "I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you, sir. How did you know it would work?" "Even with your calculations, that distance was well beyond any conventional launcher range." For the first time, a slight smile appeared on Eloyne's face. "It wasn't conventional. I've been modifying the launcher since I arrived. The adjustments compensate for environmental factors that standard systems ignore." "And you've been trying to brief me on these modifications?" "Yes, sir. Along with recommendations for implementing similar adjustments across all unit equipment." Caldwell shook his head, the full magnitude of his error becoming clearer. "I owe you an apology, Specialist." "Not necessary, sir. Results speak for themselves." "They certainly do." He stood and extended his hand. "When you're cleared by medical, I'd like that briefing, the full briefing, and I promise I'll listen this time." Elon accepted his handshake with a nod. "I'll prepare the materials, sir." 3 days later, Eloan stood before the entire unit command staff in the base's main briefing room. The wall behind her displayed complex ballistics formulas and trajectory models that few in the room fully understood, but they listened with rapt attention as she explained her modified targeting system in clear, precise terms. "The standard calculations ignore micro-terrain effects on wind patterns," she explained, indicating a series of diagrams. "In mountainous regions like the one we operated in, these effects can alter projectile trajectory by up to 27% at extreme ranges." Lieutenant Hargrove raised his hand. "So your modifications compensate for these effects precisely. By incorporating real-time atmospheric data and terrain mapping, the system can calculate accurate firing solutions at ranges previously considered impossible." Captain RH studied the technical specifications on his tablet, and this can be implemented across all our launcher systems, with minimal modification to existing equipment. Yellow confirmed. "I've prepared detailed implementation protocols." From the back of the room, Lieutenant General Caldwell watched with a mixture of admiration and regret for the months of expertise he had ignored. When the technical briefing concluded, he stepped forward. "Thank you, Specialist Kask. I believe I speak for everyone when I say we're fortunate to have your expertise." He turned to address the room. "Effective immediately, Specialist Kask will lead the implementation of these modifications across all unit equipment. Every team leader will ensure their personnel are fully trained on the new systems." The following weeks brought a transformation in both the unit's capabilities and Alan's role within it. Soldiers who had barely noticed her before now sought her guidance. Her quiet expertise, once overlooked, became one of the unit's most valued assets. 1 month after the mission, Aloan stood at attention in her dress uniform as Lieutenant General Caldwell pinned a commendation medal to her chest. The ceremony was attended by the entire unit and several high-ranking officials who had traveled specifically to witness the recognition of her extraordinary achievement. Specialist Kask demonstrated exceptional courage and skill under the most adverse conditions, Caldwell announced, his voice carrying across the assembly. Her actions saved countless lives and turned what could have been a devastating defeat into a successful mission completion. He paused, looking directly at Eloyne before continuing. "More importantly, she reminds us all of a critical lesson. Excellence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes the most exceptional talents are found in those we have failed to truly see or hear." After the ceremony, Caldwell approached Aloan with an official document. "I've put in a recommendation for your promotion and reassignment as head of our new Advanced Ballistics Training Division. We need more soldiers who can do what you do." "Thank you, sir," she replied. "But I'd prefer to remain in the field for now. There are still practical applications of my research that need testing in combat conditions." Caldwell studied her with newfound respect. "Very well. But you'll lead the training of other specialists in your methods. We can't afford to have this knowledge limited to just one person, no matter how exceptional." "Agreed, sir." The following month, Allowance stood before a classroom of specialists, both men and women, demonstrating advanced ballistics calculations on a digital whiteboard. The students selected from across different military branches for their aptitude in mathematics and marksmanship watched with intense concentration. The key is understanding that every environmental factor creates a cascading effect on your trajectory, she explained, guiding them through complex formulas with patient clarity. What seems like a minor variable at short range becomes critical at extreme distances. A young recruit raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you took out a command tank from over a mile away with a standard launcher?" A hint of a smile touched Eloyne's lips. "Focus on your calculations. That's what matters." From the doorway, where he had been observing, Lieutenant General Caldwell stepped into the room. "Yes, she did," he confirmed to the wide-eyed recruits. "And that's why you'd be wise to listen to every word she says." As class resumed, Corporal Jenkins, now assigned as Alohan's assistant instructor, distributed modified equipment for the trainees to examine. "Incredible how things change," he said quietly as he passed her. 6 months ago, no one would even look at your calculations." "The math was always sound," she replied. "It just needed the right moment to prove itself." Later that evening, as Eloyne updated her research notes in her office, a knock came at the door. Captain Rodas entered carrying a small package. "This came for you from headquarters," he said, placing it on her desk. "Apparently, they're fast-tracking production of your targeting system for all special operations units." "Good," she said simply, setting aside her work to open the package. Inside was an official military technical manual with her name listed as primary author. The cover read, "Advanced Environmental Compensation Targeting System, Field Implementation Guide." Rhodes smiled. "Congratulations. Not many specialists get to literally write the book on their field." "It's not about recognition," Elon replied, though she handled the manual with evident satisfaction. "It's about getting it right, about saving lives." Still, Rhodes said, "It must feel good to be heard after all this time." Aylin considered this as she placed the manual carefully on her desk. What matters is that the next soldier who sees what others don't, who calculates what others dismiss as impossible, might not have to wait 6 months and make a miracle shot to be taken seriously. As Rhodes left, Elon returned to her calculations. There were still improvements to make, still variables to account for. The impossible shot had opened doors, but it was just the beginning of what she knew her system could achieve. The specialist who had been invisible for so long now stood in the spotlight she had always deserved, not because she had demanded recognition, but because her quiet excellence had finally become impossible to ignore. Subscribe to The Ordinary Heroes.